Hello, I'm Shannon McQuaid. I am the founder of FireFlex Yoga, a yoga program that delivers mindfulness and yoga to first responders. And today I'm speaking with Lisa Houlé. Lisa and I met through a mutual friend and podcaster, Christy Warren, who hosts the podcast Firefighter Deconstructed. Lisa, thank you so much for being with me today. How are you?
I'm doing so well, Shannon. Thank you. And thank you for having me as a guest. And I thank Christy Warren for us connecting. She's an amazing human being, just like you.
Oh,
So it's such a great, community of people with like-minded goals and values and things that they stand for to help first responders. So I'm really, really grateful to have been welcomed with open arms.
oh, yeah. And it's only growing, isn't it, Lisa? This whole web and community of people who are supporting first responders, it just seems to grow each and every day.
I am so surprised every time I get on like LinkedIn or on Instagram or some other social media platform to see, yes, exactly that. Like how many people are interested in this issue. How many people, for example, have like started following me, which is just amazing and such a blessing. And then, I like to put clients and other people with sort of similar values on this topic. I like to put us all in touch with each other so that we all stay connected because I think it's really important to get the word out that this network is growing and it is so important. So yes, it's been amazing. There are some awesome people out there doing such great work on this topic.
Yes, and you are one of them. So would you just take a moment to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yes, of course. So, my name is Lisa Houlé, and I am a criminal defense attorney. The bulk of my practice is representing first responders who are either charged with a crime or under investigation by the police. I was a former LA County prosecutor for 15 years before I opened up my criminal defense practice about 5 years ago. So I've been involved in this world of criminal law and investigations for like over 20 years. Um, and it just, going from being a prosecutor to now doing defense work for first responders really just was it was just a natural progression. I had worked with so many police officers and detectives and firefighters over the years because of my cases as a prosecutor. In order to file those cases and charge the bad guys with a crime and hold them responsible and sometimes go all the way to trial, which oftentimes we had to. Um, I spent a lot of time with these men and women, and it allowed me to really learn a lot about their career, their culture, and their lifestyle, and to really get like an sort of an intimate sense of the how tough a job it is,
Mm,
and how they really are exposed to trauma over and over and over again, which was sort of like the birth of this whole idea then, about wanting to help them.
yeah.
So yeah, that's the short answer of who I am.
Wow. So you've been doing the criminal defense work for the past 5 years.
Yes,
And
yes.
I'm curious if you could just sort of describe to us what a typical day looks like for you now, if people are not familiar with your line of work.
Yeah, so it is interesting because it's very different than what we would call maybe like a normal job. No 2 days are ever the same. I was just, for example, in court this morning. I represent a chief of police, and we had a very great result this morning, something that she's been waiting for. So that was the start to my day.
Yeah.
And then, on any given day, it really is about taking phone calls from new potential clients and just kind of figuring out, what it is that is going on, what their legal issue is or may become, because sometimes they don't know exactly like how far a criminal case is going to go, if it's even going to become a case. It might just be an investigation.
Yeah.
And then when I'm not, talking to potential new clients, I'm just staying in touch with current clients, which I do have to say, I run a very sort of specialized boutique practice. I do
Mhm.
not take mass volume of cases. I take fewer cases to really keep it very intimate and centered around the client. And for that reason, clients can always reach me. They can always call me. They can always reach out to me in a text, and I'm very responsive, which is really important to them when they're going through something like this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you had mentioned that, in your work as a district attorney, you spent a lot of time with first responders and you got to know more about their life, about their exposure to critical incidents. And then I'm
Right.
wondering, was there a catalyzing event that caused you to shift course in your career, or was it just a natural progression? Like you just felt so moved?
So that's a great question for a lot of reasons. If you had asked me maybe 10 years ago whether I would have ever left the DA's office and stopped being a prosecutor, I would have said, "You're crazy. I would never leave this job. This is an amazing job where you do good work, you stand up for what is right, and you are helping people who've been victimized." And that felt really, really good.
Yeah.
It gave me a reason to wake up in the morning, and it gave me sort of just a sense of goodness and giving back to the community.
Mhm.
But what I will say is that because the cases that I handled, I was in a special unit that handled a lot of domestic violence, sex crimes, domestic homicides, child abuse, all of the really, really icky cases that where suspects really prey on vulnerable victims. I did notice probably, I would say, halfway through my 15-year career as prosecutor, I did start to notice that the cases and the subject was really starting to affect me. And
Mm.
because it was starting to affect me, I became curious as to whether it was affecting, the police officers and other first responders that were a part of these cases. Because I thought to myself, okay, I'm like a couple layers removed, so
Right.
if this is affecting me, and I of course said, oh well, I'm a female, maybe it doesn't affect them as much because a lot of the people in this career are males. But
Mhm.
as I started to inquire and ask questions, I learned that I was absolutely right, that it definitely affected them. And
Mhm.
so then, fast forward to the end of my 15-year career, which culminated in one of the most serious and most brutal homicides that I was involved with, and I did have to try that case. After going through that experience, I just really thought, this is it. Like when you do a murder trial like that and you convict that person and hold them responsible, that's like you've hit the top. I mean, you've
Wow.
done what a lot of prosecutors hope to do in their career. And I also wasn't getting any younger, so I thought, if I'm going to leave, I should probably do it now.
Oh.
And that's exactly what I did. So it was sort of after that big case that I decided this was the time. And I'm a risk taker, and I always have been, and I just got up and said, I'm leaving.
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Wow.
so yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, when you said you were noticing it began to affect you, like what were you noticing? So, and you were referring to the fact, for just to reframe for our listeners, the fact that you were working really tough cases, domestic
Yes.
violence, homicide, probably things involving the violence against children. I mean, just the most difficult
Right.
aspects of our society, and that was the really the waters you were swimming in as
Yes.
district attorney. Okay. So
Yes.
what was changing for you around?
So, there were a lot of things, and it's interesting because it's a slow effect. It doesn't just you don't just wake up one morning and say, "Oh my God, I'm totally messed up." It happens slowly and gradually. And I, used to say, people used to ask me, because it's a common question when you're involved in this line of work. People will ask you, like, oh my gosh, how do you not let it affect you? How do you not let it affect your family? How do you go home and be around your children and your husband? How do you deal with this? And I always said, oh, it doesn't affect me. I'm just really good at, when the day is over, I go home, and I would say that. But I did start to realize, I'm not so sure that that's actually being totally forthcoming, because I started to sort of ruminate about the bad cases.
Mm.
Some cases are worse than others, and any first responder or anybody involved in this line of work will tell you that there are some that are bad that you can sort of get through and kind of push to the side, but there are some that you can't and that you will never forget. And in fact, I'll tell you a true story. On the very last trial I did before I left the DA's office, my jurors in that trial were traumatized. I mean, traumatized. They were like,
Wow.
actually kind of angry. Like, how could you do this to us?
Wow.
This was awful. This was traumatic. They told me they were having nightmares. I mean, and they tell you these things obviously after the trial when you're allowed to speak to them.
Right.
But I started having nightmares too. I had nightmares about that case like 6 months before the trial even started.
Ah,
So when you start to ruminate and you can't get those thoughts out of your mind, and your sense of safety starts to really be sort of compromised, which
yeah.
is part of the definition of trauma, when your own sense of safety and security is compromised by some event that you've gone through. That's when it kind of I started to pay a little bit more attention, and then started researching, secondary trauma, which is exactly what it was. I was being traumatized as a, person removed from the actual scene, because I'm not the victim, but I'm somebody intimately involved in the process. And that's sort of where this whole sort of interest in this topic began.
Incredible. Incredible, Lisa.
Yeah.
Secondary trauma, also vicarious trauma. Are those?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Well,
Exactly.
well, thank you for telling us that. That sounds like it was pretty intimate and it was pretty
Yeah.
significant for
And
you.
it's, and that's something that you see too, when you're working with the firefighters, and just sort of, the stress and the anxiety that they go through, which of course is completely normal, completely predictable in this type of a career, but
Yeah.
something that they sometimes are unwilling to recognize and admit. But you see it too. I mean, what this, you come from a family of firefighters, and you work in that industry now, and try to help them and help them manage their stress. It's almost like other people outside can recognize it before they can. um,
Yeah.
and that's something that we really need to work on, like helping first responders understand and sort of recognize that this will happen, and that it's okay to let it happen. It's okay to not be okay, and to ask for help, right? I mean, that's what we do as humans.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, and I just want to say I want to share a story too, because you were so forthcoming, and I really appreciate that. I noticed before this call, I was sharing with you how throughout all of my different professions, the common thread was the fact that I always tried to bring yoga and mindfulness, no matter what line of work I was doing. And in the last
right.
7 years, I've been doing this work with bringing yoga and mindfulness to first responders. And but I also taught in yoga studios. And when you teach in yoga studios, when you walk into a yoga studio, have you had gone to yoga studios before?
I have looked inside one
Okay.
to see. I need to start yoga though. Maybe we'll do a private class over Zoom one day.
I love that. Um, but typically yoga studios are well lit, they're clean, they have just like a beautiful ambiance about them. You feel good inside it. Everybody comes in, they might come in a little weary and stressed out, but at the end of the class, people are super friendly, super
Yeah.
generous, wanting to connect, but you go inside a fire station, at least this is my experience. And when I was done with some of those classes, I was exhausted,
I
drained.
would imagine. Yeah.
I mean, you just take it on, you take it in. I mean, you go into that environment. It's a heavy, heavy environment, even though there's laughter and joking and stuff going on. As a person who's not a first responder and who's sensitive, oh my gosh. Yeah.
Oh,
So,
yeah. Yeah. I
um,
totally understand that. Yes.
so what would you, so I'm curious real quickly, I just want to ask you one more question about you. We know that in the first responder community that there's so much, there's many challenges because of the stereotypes, because of stigma for
Uh-huh.
getting help. Did you have permission, when you were noticing that your life was becoming affected, you personally were becoming affected, did you have permission to go seek help?
So well, yes, because I could always just opt, to use my own private insurance,
Yeah,
and ask for help that way. But what
yeah,
I will tell you is the minute I reconciled that this was really happening to me and that these cases were affecting me, then I started asking not only the police officers and first responders about their experiences, but I did ask other prosecutors. So I reconnected with like a couple prosecutors from my training unit who had been now assigned to like work gang cases, because those are pretty heavy. Obviously, most of those are murders or attempted murders. And I reached out because I wanted to know, like, am I going crazy or does this really happen?
yeah,
And they all said it absolutely affects them. It absolutely happens. And we all, as a group, said to ourselves, this is something that should be trained. We should do training on this even within the DA's office and other prosecutorial agencies. We never really got it launched within the LA County DA's office as like a specific, component of the training program. But I have always said, I think that it can affect lawyers, it can affect judges. I mean, even the judge in that last case, he was like really shaken by the whole experience. I
wow,
mean, the
Lisa.
guy the guy really was like a psychopath,
Mhm.
and he had no remorse.
Yeah,
And when you are sitting in a room with somebody like that, for like a 2 or 3 week trial, and watching him and watching his complete, lack of emotion for the brutal, he almost decapitated his girlfriend and her mother. I mean, it was brutal.
oh my God.
And every single person in that courtroom, even the judge who had been in this line of work for years, was
Yeah,
impacted.
yes.
So yeah, so that is all to say, yes, I could have asked for help just on my own, but I absolutely think that as an organization, any prosecutorial office should also implement this sort of secondary trauma training so that these young, because you can become a DA like right out of law school when you're like 25, 26, and I mean you're just a baby then.
Yeah,
And then you're, just left in charge of a courtroom hearing all these things and it starts to get to you. So yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you for bringing that up for us in teaching
yeah,
us. That was
of
incredible.
course, of course.
I do, let me just take a glance here at, so you work with all first responders who
Mhm.
come to you and you accept their cases. Um,
Yes.
Now I know, and I bet you know this as well, even though we like to clump this group of professionals as first responders, if you were to do a ride along with a patrol officer and then the next day do a ride along with a group of firefighters, their jobs honestly couldn't be more different, even though they're similar,
100%.
right? So
Yes.
I'm curious, when you listen to the stories, obviously without revealing any kind of confidentiality,
Right.
what are some of the main differences you hear and or similarities in stories?
So, I think that the biggest difference is that the police are by nature of their job, they are oftentimes not only thrust into a critical or traumatic incident, but then they're having to deal firsthand with the quote unquote bad guy, and I think that really is um, a complex issue for them,
Mhm.
because it's really hard to see another person experience a traumatic event, like let's say a child being, beaten by their parent,
Right.
we tend to, of course, empathize with the child, but then you have to turn your attention to the perpetrator when you are the police officer or detective that's involved in that case. And then you have to, and then of course everything changes, your whole operational mindset changes because you don't know what that person's going to do. They may do something to you.
Mhm.
Goodness knows that a domestic violence or, child abuse call, those are some of the most dangerous calls that first responders can respond to.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it's the police. So that I think is something that's very different from what firefighters see. Having said that, though, I think that what firefighters are exposed to is some of the worst things that any human should ever have to experience. I mean, I have a couple clients, both current and former clients, who responded to some of our nation's most tragic
Yeah.
days. I've a retired New York City firefighter who responded to 9/11 and
Right.
literally went for months searching for signs of life, recovering dead bodies. It's like that just, I can't even comprehend what that really truly felt like for him. But I will tell you, and I say this on almost every single interview because it's the honest to God truth, he was one of the very first responders that I ever represented. And every single day I think about him, he is absolutely a part of why I do what I do because his case and his story just impacted me so tremendously. I mean, from the PTSD to the medical issues that he suffered from as a result of that, tragedy,
Yeah.
he'll just never be the same. And it just breaks my heart. And then I've got another current client who responded to like the Oklahoma City bombing. It's like another horrific tragedy.
Yeah.
So it's no wonder, that these, firefighters sometimes have similar or even worse trauma than the police officers because they really see terrible things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly I hear you. It's not a race to the bottom. It's not a comparison who has it worse. But I just was wondering, because you get to take a deeper dive, on the surface level,
Mhm.
say first responders, but you get to take a much deeper dive with each individual client.
Right.
And at that level, I was just curious
Yeah.
if you
And
ex
that's actually a good way of putting it, taking a deeper dive because I really do try to do that. I mean, you almost have to if you want to do this job right. But when somebody comes in, like I have another, retired sergeant that just came in the other day, and he is here on a DUI case. And he, unfortunately hit a few parked cars while DUI. Thank God nobody was injured. He wasn't injured. None of the people, were in the cars. Um, but, the first thing I said was, let's put the DUI aside. Like, what is going on in your life? You're retired. Like, what is going on?
right.
And he said, you know what? It was the minute that I retired that everything kind of like hit me. Because when you turn off that sort of operational mindset of like, okay, you got to be ready, we got to be tactically ready, we have to be ready to serve a warrant or go on a SWAT call or whatever. When those defenses go down and now you have time to sort of sit there and let it all kind of sink in, that's when it hit him. And
Wow.
that's when he started to think about all the horrible cases.
Wow.
So, and so my job obviously is not just to deal with the DUI and the fallout of all of that, but to help him get the help he needs so
Yeah.
that this doesn't happen again. And then of course they sit there and they say, I'm an idiot, I should have known better. And I look at them like, oh my God, you are so far from an idiot. Like you spent your life putting your life before complete strangers,
Exactly.
serving this community,
Yeah.
seeing things that nobody should ever have to see. It's no wonder that something like this would happen.
Yeah.
Our brains are fragile. We can't, you can't take that much trauma and not unload.
Exactly.
So yeah. So it really is about digging deeper to find out what really is going on to if you really want to truly help them. If you just want to do sort of a surface job, well then, just process the DUI and move on. But That's
Yeah,
not what I want to do. I want to really understand what got them there.
I love that. And really to understand, really for them to understand, what they were exposed to and what they're up against, and maybe to reconcile the shame, that,
Absolutely. That
right?
shame is it's such a strong emotion, for these mostly men that are involved in this job, but sometimes women too. Christy being a great example,
Yeah,
tough cookie, served her community, saw some terrible, terrible things, and said, this would never happen to me. And then it's like, oh my gosh, one day it just kind of hits and you're like, oh crap, it's
yeah.
happened to me.
Without
So
permission, right? Without permission, and no matter how strong you are, it does not discriminate all the
right.
exposure to.
That's that is very true. Yeah.
Well, last question I have for you, because you also are in this amazing position to see what's occurring from the perspective of a first responder, but then also see what's occurring from the perspective of the public, and then all the different layers of the judicial system and policymakers. I feel as a civilian, which is what I am, and you know our civilian community, we seem to be quite complacent about placing the responsibility, the full responsibility of safety, of law and order, of crisis intervention on the shoulders of our first responders. And I know, and that's too big of a burden for any human being. So I'm wondering, what is our responsibility in your perspective? What as civilians could we be doing a better job of to help our first responders?
Wow. You have such great questions, Shannon. So that is that I think that's probably a very simple answer, although my brain is going in so many different directions. I think the most important thing these days is that we are so quick to judge.
Mm,
And I certainly am not one to say that we shouldn't judge. Some situations do call for judgment when judgment is due. I completely, embrace that. However, judging prematurely when we don't have all the information is never a good decision, right? Because how can you give really an accurate judgment on a situation if you don't have all the information?
true.
Um, and I think it's really important to sort of embrace them and each other as a community. I mean, goodness knows this nation, this great nation, has literally been turned upside down this year for a
Right.
lot of different reasons.
Absolutely.
And I think it's really important to realize, the delicate nature of us as human beings, and that we are all in this together. And especially first responders, they're just trying to do their job. They do not wake up in the morning and say, oh, I want to kill somebody today. That's not what they do. They go to these calls with the information that they are given, trying to make the best decision to help that family or that person or whoever is in a crisis, in that medical emergency, whatever it is. And they're human beings just like you and I.
Right.
They are not robots. And they are just trying to survive just like you and I and do the best that they can. So it really is about, I think, balancing sort of the delicate nature of, us as humans and as a community, taking care of each other instead of pushing each other away and judging.
Wow. Thanks for saying
Was
that.
that a good answer? I just feel like that's such a big question.
Well, first of all, I was thinking about my questions for you, and I'm like, this is a very smart, professional, experienced woman. I know that she's going to be able to handle any question I send her, but that's an important one for me. And what I heard you say is really, seek first to understand, offer grace, and support each other. Do our part in supporting our neighbor, not
Right.
pushing them away. And
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's essential.
Yeah, and and people like you, that's exactly what you're doing, right? I mean, your whole thing is being there to support people in need.
Yeah.
That's sort of what this whole community, of people like us who are trying to smash the stigma. I mean, that's the whole point, right? We're trying to bring normalcy and life to this topic instead of just saying, those people made bad decisions, they drove drunk, they did whatever. I mean, it would be really easy just to judge and cast them aside, but that's not fair. Everybody deserves a second chance. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's sort of my thought on that.
Yeah, it's a bad decision, not a bad person. That's
Exactly.
what judgment is. It's judging the
Exactly.
person, not the behavior. And who are we
Yes.
to say? I mean, all of us have made mistakes, made bad
Yeah.
decisions. Well, beautiful. So, I is there anything else you want to leave with, Lisa? Or, I'm going to make sure that along with this conversation, people have all of your contact information, but anything you want to close with?
Oh, goodness. I mean, I think really I just want to get the word out there that there are people like me who specialize in representing first responders when they are in criminal legal trouble. Again, it's a very specialized practice that I have developed. Most criminal defense attorneys just take all different types of criminal cases, no matter what the crime or who the person or whatever. And I've really taken my time to really figure out what my gift is and why I was, put here to do this job. And I now understand that I really do want to stand for something, greater than me, which is helping these men and women when they need it most.
Yep.
This is a nightmare that any police officer who's ever walked into my office, never wanted to live. They never wanted to end up, in the crosshairs of a criminal investigation, obviously, or a firefighter.
Yeah.
And so I really, I care about these cases so much, and I'm, here to help in any way that I can.
You clearly care.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing. Um, as people who have specialized, like people are you rare? That's the question I'm
Mhm.
trying to ask. Is it hard to find, or is it hard to get time with you? Is it rare? Is your work rare?
So the specialization is rare,
Yeah.
but because of this sort of unique way that I've set up my practice, it's not hard to get time with me at all. I mean, that's specifically why I have created my practice in the way that I have, to really focus it and narrow it and set it up sort of like a boutique law firm where I take fewer cases to be able to, really put my time and attention into those clients. Because as we've been saying, all throughout this podcast, this career and the types of people that go into this career, and then the sort of the problems and issues that may flow from the trauma, it really creates a very complex set of issues that all sort of play into why they are in this situation if they have to come meet with me. And it really does take, a specialist to understand that, and it takes somebody that has, the time and energy to be able to spend on these cases. So yeah.
And is the best way to get in touch with you, Lisa, your website?
My website or just my cell phone. I oftentimes just get direct referrals from other, police and firefighters. So my work cell phone is one of the best ways to reach out to me. So if you are welcome to post the work cell phone number,
Okay.
and I'll make sure that you have the correct one. But yeah, I'm very easy to find on the internet. Very easy.
And your website is?
My website is Houlé, Houle hyphen, and then the word law, LAW.com. And then my work cell is 424-332-9079. And I text all day long.
You're amazing. You're so amazing. And you
Right
look
too.
amazing. I'm really
Oh,
glad you're taking such good care of yourself, because your work
thank
is
you.
vital. Is vital, Lisa.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. I appreciate you having me on. It's so nice to see you.
It's nice to see you too.